This is Steve Vinson. You're about to experience the life science effect. Hello, aspiring leaders. Welcome to another episode of the Life Science Effect, where we work to answer the question, what does it take for me to be an effective leader in the field of life sciences? Each week, we will talk to the best in the business to answer your questions about what it takes to be a leader in life sciences. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And always be asking yourself, what effect will you cause? And we're here with Valita Fredland. Valita is VP, General Counsel, and Privacy Officer. I messed that up because I was about to say Chief Cook and Bottle Washer, but I don't know.
And you can say that too. In a small company like that, it works out like that.
One day they said, we have all these different jobs. Do we hire a bunch of people or do we hire Valita?
Yeah.
For the Indiana Health Information Exchange. Before that, she was Chief Privacy Officer at IHIE Health. So two things, fill in the gaps for me on your, what makes Valita Valita and what the Indiana Health Information Exchange is. So in any order.
Okay, I will. Yes, so let's start with what I do, and then I'll sort of back into how I got there.
Okay.
And the why. I am the Vice President, General Counsel, and Privacy Officer for Indiana Health Information Exchange, sometimes referred to as IHIE.
IHIE.
IHIE has been around about 16 years, and I believe it's ahead of its curve. And the curve that it's on is one of health information technology and exchange. So the interoperability of our health information. As soon as large healthcare providers were able to digitize information, which goes back to the 1970s, 1980s, became more organized and useful in the 1990s. They determined it would be most helpful if information stored at one healthcare provider could be exchanged with another when patients travel. And that's what IHIE does for Indiana healthcare providers and a little bit nationally at the moment with a pilot called the Patient-Centered Data Home Pilot. And that's with participants across the country, essentially. And this movement of interoperability of health information is also on the national agenda in terms of making every patient's digital health information available to the patient and also where it's needed for care. That's the ultimate goal. So I love working in that space. I got in this space back when I started at what was then Wishart Health Services, now Eskenazi Health. And we had a couple of clinicians who were physicians and PhDs in computer science, and they were virtualizing digital health information into desktops so that it could be accessed by the doctors there to provide care. And that was my first foray into electronic health records and the use of technology, and I was in love with this topic. So my journey led me to Indiana University Health, which was then called Clarion Health Partners when I moved over in 1998. And one of my first large initiatives was to help with the implementation of its mature clinical medical record. We had an electronic health record from a small vendor, and they were looking across the country saying, what should be our next electronic medical record? And so I was tagged as the newbie on the team to say, hey, go figure out what this technology thing is and do that. So I started there and grew my practice. So I'm now an attorney who practices in health information technology with a particular interest in privacy and security of information, or the lack thereof, one might say now.
Yeah.
The reason I love practicing in this area is it tends to be very cutting edge. And because innovation can raise legal questions that have no clear precedent or clear clearly applicable law. And therefore, a good appreciation of an ethical framework can be a helpful guide when you're trying to act. And in addition to practicing law, I've practiced and taught bioethics for most of my career. And the principles of bioethics, which are really quickly autonomy or an agency, individual agency, beneficence, non-maleficence, don't do harm, and justice are good starting points for matters of information, privacy, and security.
Autonomy, which is the agency one, and was the
beneficence. Try to do good.
Do good. What was it? It was respect the individual, do good, do no harm,
and justice. Yeah,
justice. Really when we were talking the other day, justice was very interesting to me. And when it comes to leadership, especially in the life science industry, ethics is very important to me. Because, well, like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Right.
And as we're leading these projects, whether it be in the pharmaceutical industry or at a hospital with people's health information or medical devices, the FDA or the regulatory bodies for hospitals are never going to be able to catch everything, right?
That's right.
So we need ethical, responsible leaders. And the word leader means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So I like using that. I like the idea of the ethical framework to basically say, yeah, leaders get things done. So the quickest, easiest definition of leaders get things done. Well, bad people get things done too, right?
That's right.
So what makes a good leader?
That's right.
So respect the individual, do good, don't do bad.
Don't harm, yeah.
And justice. Now, when people say social justice, it sort of has a tinge, like a political tinge to it. But the way you explained it the other day takes the politics out of it. So maybe give us your take on justice. What does that mean in terms of being ethical?
Well, it means that the principles that you hold dear to your leadership need to be applied to everyone equally. Particularly in healthcare, justice can take many shapes. An example might be the availability of healthy organs for transplant to one group of individuals and not to another. This would not, I believe, fall into a justice framework of ethics. And so you can take that in many directions, and sometimes it's not as clear as other and requires study to appreciate how actions may not be having equitable outcomes. Yeah. And so it can be very gray, but just as important.
Absolutely. And you hit on a great thing, which is these ethical frameworks. To me, it doesn't mean it's going to tell you what to do in every situation. It just means consider these things, have these things be part of what goes into your decision making. I mean, in pharma, it comes to mind in pharma that if you're providing a medication, yes, you want to bring money in so that you can develop more life-saving drugs. But at the same time, if there are people who don't have access to the drugs that you're developing because of money, what are you doing? And I'm not saying run out and just give away stuff and go bankrupt because you're not making any money. But what are you doing to improve access, say, in third world countries or even in the United States, to help people get access to drugs, regardless of whether they can afford it? So,
right. That's a great application of the principle. And it also goes to, you can think about populations that have a particular disease, but there's just not enough of you.
Right.
To make it worth spending the intense resources it takes to come up with a treatment. So, yeah, it's an important
It's been
principle.
a while since I was on a project, and I'm assuming they still do the orphan drug program in the FDA, where they give priority status and to drugs that gigantism was one of the drugs I was working on. Maybe 100,000 people have it, but the company I was at was focusing on it because FDA gave it priority review status.
Yes,
So
they do
good.
try to accommodate.
Speaking of ethical frameworks and characteristics of leaders, I bet I have a good idea of where this one's going to go. When you're looking for leaders in your organization, how do you figure out what are the characteristics you're looking for when you're trying to build your team?
Well, hopefully I don't get too philosophical. I think that's a risk, spending too much time in the gray area. But to me, you need someone who's smart, knowledgeable, and yet knows when they don't know. So that is to say, knows when to bring in other thought leaders or experts in particular areas where they've been asked to lead. I think it's also important to be a continuous leader. It's one thing that I have tried to do. It's essential in my area because of the cutting edge technology, but it's also really important, I think, for any leader to be a continuous learner so that you can stay up to date and relevant. Also, be an active observer and a listener. This could be a segue into empathy, but the ability to understand other people and their experiences so that you can anticipate their reactions and needs in times of leading in different directions. And then perhaps most importantly, some modesty and an appropriate sense of humor, I think. Is
appropriate being the key word there, right?
Being the key word. I realize the loaded potentials there, but modesty and an appropriate sense of humor can really help a leader fill out a personal character that is appreciated by those, because leaders sometimes have to make very difficult and hard decisions. And I think if you can approach that with some modesty and some humor, appropriate again as the caveat,
right,
it can help. And it can help alleviate tension and bring some real personal characteristics to a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. I'm not one for the humor. I don't like the humor thing.
I know that not to be true.
The appropriate part of the humor now.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that last part. A lot of good stuff in there. That last part. One of the things I think about is helping people see that, have a perspective that while we work in the health industry and it sometimes is life or death, not everything is life or death, right? And if we decide to do this project this way or that way, if you don't get your way, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. And so getting some perspective and being able to lighten up the room a little bit, I find as being useful from time to time.
Yeah. And to recognize difference and those that know things that you don't. And that can be know a life experience that you don't. And I think it's been pretty well studied, particularly published in the Harvard Business Review several times, that having a good deal of diversity in leadership strengthens an organization and allows it to make better, smarter decisions about where it's going to go in the future by having multidisciplinary views on a topic. And I'm a strong believer in that as well.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Okay, now everybody's got those few projects that they're proud of, and then like maybe one that they wish they could forget about.
Yeah.
Let's start with the good news. What project do you think about and you think back of, like, you're just really proud of it? You wish every project could go like that.
So I have one that I really like, and I talk about it whenever I get the opportunity, and you've just given me the opportunity. And it is the launch of a privacy program for a large 18-hospital healthcare system. And in the late 1990s, as I mentioned, the healthcare entities began amassing sensitive digital information. Amassing truly millions of patients, millions of bits and bytes of sensitive information about the patients. And I was charged with being accountable for establishing a privacy and security program for this new database or databases of sensitive digital information. And this was a big change at the time because it was a change from the paper clinical files that we used to keep on shelves locked in a cabinet where a couple of people had a key to a new system, very quickly, a new system with a large database handing out virtual keys to thousands of people, all with access to all of the information.
Wow.
Not files, not siloed, but handing out virtual keys.
Yeah.
And so when you conceptualize it in this way, it really is a big responsibility to say to your colleagues in a healthcare system, you individually are accountable for the privacy and security of our entire database. Mm-hmm. And so while the leaders couldn't allocate resources to building the program at the time, and there wasn't a business case to be made for the return on investment in this area necessarily. While it was required by the regulations, they recognized that you could put together policies and procedures, but putting a lot of resources behind it at the time didn't make sense. But they trusted me to give me authority to create the program however I thought would be most effective for the organization. And without a lot of resources, I needed to call upon my colleagues. And I had been in the healthcare organization a while, which was lovely. I had great relationships with clinical leaders. And so what I did was create a privacy and security council. It had multidisciplinary representation. It had everything from environmental services representatives, physical security, the police, the IT security, clinical nursing, social work. You get the gist. It had representation from every department. It also had representation from all of our facilities, all of the hospitals. The approach I wanted to take was I want everybody to be an expert like I am. So you can proselytize within your department, within your building, with your colleagues about the need to be knowledgeable about privacy and security. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be a really great council. I created it with a very intentional agenda. And rather than saying we're going to come up with policies and procedures for privacy and security, I decided to educate people about the threats so that they would buy into the policies and procedures we needed to create, which I could do later at my own desk. And so I used news from across, particularly the healthcare industry, but across the globe, essentially, about privacy and security threats, what they, how they were manifesting themselves, and we talked about them. Over time, the council grew because people learned that we were having these discussions. They were interested in privacy and security. They found the information not only very important and relevant for working in their professional responsibilities within our organization, but personally relevant and important. So they could go home and tell their high schoolers how to protect themselves on their computer, to be aware of phishing schemes, both at home and at work. And so now, 20 years later, it's still a going concern. And so it was really a great success. And I've noticed as I go to conferences for privacy professionals that this is a model being taken in other industries, including large tech companies like IBM. They're creating multidisciplinary privacy and security councils or committees so that everyone in the organization can understand the privacy and security needs and that it becomes part of the DNA of the operations by design.
Yeah. What were the keys, like one or two things that were the keys to the success of that project?
One was a lot of hard work and preparation for every single meeting. I wanted every single meeting to be relevant, to be interesting, and that the message was clear at the end of those. Here's what we're asking you to do. And I think the other thing too was I asked them, and I also tried to prognosticate about the future so that we could anticipate where we needed to spend our time, where we needed to spend our focus on incoming threats. So, I remember the first years of this committee, we often talked about thumb drives or USB drives that you stuck into a computer and people could accidentally download a lot of information. Well, that became passé pretty quickly. And then we weren't talking about thumb drives anymore. And we were trying to think about the next area of threat. And so I think it was preparation, focused on interest and being clear about the message you were trying to send.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now for the bad news.
Yeah.
Which one, even though you're trying to forget it, and here I am digging up old wounds, what's the one you'd rather forget about?
Well, so I wouldn't couch it in terms of wanting to forget it because it was an extremely important learning experience.
Forgetting is you're right. You don't want to forget those because you don't want to repeat them, right? Right.
I don't want to repeat it, and there are lessons in it. And even in reflection, I'm not sure how to approach this particular project differently. I was tasked with leading the implementation of a meaningful conflict of interest policy for an organization. And the policy was to address the management of conflicts of interest. And I'm clear about saying management rather than avoidance, because I don't think you can't really avoid conflicts of interest. We're all humans. We all have relationships, and they're bound to arise. But my charge was to be able to appropriately manage conflicts, and especially in two aspects of the operations. One, making sure that there was independent clinical decision-making. And the other was to ensure independent financial arrangements by the organization, so that financial decisions, whether you're signing a contract or hiring somebody as a consultant, sending money somewhere, that those decisions were made in the best interest of the organization and not the best interest of the employee making the decision. Right. Or the best interest of a family member or someone related to that individual. And so I thought, this is a great mission. How clear could it be? Yeah, and if you think about my ethical framework and ethics training, I thought, well, of course we want our physicians to make decisions in the best interest of their patients, not improperly influenced by a third party, by gifts from pharma or by device manufacturers or whatever it might be, trips given to them for conferences. And also that our leaders don't hire their friends for above market contracts or rent out a building they own to our organization, whatever it might be.
Of course, every leader would think that way, right?
Right. And so you want to, and so I thought, well, I'll write down what I assume we're already doing because this sounds right to me. And as I began on the project and started my first drafts, using what I thought was pretty good guidance. And at the time, I will say as a sidebar, conflict of interest policies, particularly in medical schools, was getting a lot of press. And some medical school leaders really understood the issue. They grabbed it by the horns. They wrote it down, said, we're not going to do this behavior. This is how we're going to behave on our campus, and moved forward. It caused a lot of angst. And this is where naively, I anticipated that the rules that were given, hey, let's not have conflicts. Let's have independent clinical decision-making. Well, it sounds right. It's very nuanced. And so my naivete was not anticipating the depth and breadth of the benefits afforded to clinicians and leaders from having these conflicts, and that it's an individual benefit. And when you take away those benefits, you need to replace it with something. And so I hadn't anticipated that well, and needed to better appreciate when you take things of value away, we needed to have some way to replace it. Or to acknowledge it first and help include them in the plan to avoid and manage.
So is that the lesson you take forward, including looking at the stakeholders and seeing who might be losing something as a result of this project, and what can we do to make sure they're supporting the project as opposed to opposing it? Right.
For sure. I mean, I think, yes, the lesson I learned was, even though this sounds right and good, I hadn't anticipated the consequences. So I needed to do better prepreration and anticipation of that. Just because it's right and good doesn't mean everybody's going to hop on board with you, Valita.
Well, in large projects, we do stakeholder analysis, know, and you always have to look for who's going to lose something, right? Even though it's going to be a net gain for the organization because this is a good project to do, people won't automatically just go, I'm going to lose my corner office, but it's better for the corporation or the organization or whatever. So, okay. They're just not going to happen that way.
Good example. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay. You have a time machine. You're able to go back, and there's little Valita just starting out. What advice? What would you say? What would you say to yourself?
I would say take each opportunity given to you as if you are the best person they could have given that job to. Don't second guess yourself that somebody offered you something that you don't seem worthy of. So give it a solid try. You might find later it's not a good fit, or you don't like it, or it's not your skill set, but don't pass it up without trying it, particularly if it's in your wheelhouse. So I'm not saying look for every opportunity and go take opportunities, but if it's something you're trying to achieve, or it's in your professional wheelhouse and someone offers you an opportunity, don't succumb to self-doubt. A risk that I think is much higher, particularly with individuals who are raised as girls and women in our country. From the time we leave the family to go to school at age 3 or so, expectations are made clear. You are not a natural leader. You're not a natural leader.
Yeah.
And I think back to when my kids were very young, and I pulled out educational placemats for the solar systems and the skeleton and the U.S. presidents. And we're sitting there with our bowl of cereal on top of the placemats, and it takes about 30 seconds to realize that as a young girl, you're not expected to strive to be president.
And until recently, if you're not white.
And until recently, you are not white.
Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah. And so, though we're making good strides, I think when times get tough, like with economic uncertainty or when economy takes a downturn, organizations tend to turn inside to what they know.
Oh, yeah.
And the negative impact is we lose advances that minorities, particularly women and African Americans in the United States, lose some of the advances they've made. And they return to white male leadership in places of power. Women need to be self-confident, speak up, and be willing to lose a seat at the table to stand up for what's right.
I love it. I have 2 girls, you know that.
Yeah.
And I'm married to a girl, and our dog is a girl. I'm surrounded by women, right? And what we try to do with our daughters, and I hope we've been successful, is, to your point, we can't control what goes on outside the home. I like to think we've chosen a school for them where it's reinforced that they're leaders, and we try to reinforce that at home. There's no difference, between you and the boy that wants to take the leadership position. Stand your ground. And I think and it's funny because I have to fight my prejudices too, and I have to be careful not to bring in the biases of, but you don't want to go too far. Don't be, what's the word they use? Bossy. I hate that when I hear somebody tell a little girl that she's being bossy, because I've never heard anybody tell a little boy that he's being bossy.
That's an excellent example. And it happens even in the most well-meaning academic environments. It's subtle. But that's a perfect example, Steve. Yeah.
Anything else before we go to the rapid fire round that you wanted to make sure that you got in?
Well, one thing you had prepped me about was what else did you want to tell people about? Yeah. And I said, no matter where or how you choose to lead, by definition, others are watching you and following your example as a leader. So be good.
Yeah.
Be good. My personal hope, too, is that in roles of leaders, that we will take responsibility for being good stewards of the environment. This is not an earthy, crunchy, tree-hugging plea. It's the only one we've been given. And in many instances, being good stewards of the environment have been proven to make a business more sustainable, economically, operationally more sustainable. So that would be my plea.
Absolutely. Completely agree. So we'll take a little break, and when we come back, we'll do rapid fire, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Sounds great. Thank you.
A very special thanks to our first sponsor this week. It's the Indiana Health Industry Forum. IHIF is a statewide trade association representing Indiana's health science business community. The diverse members of the Indiana Health Industry Forum generate the collective voice of the state's health and life science industry. Their mission is to connect key stakeholders to enhance business networks, advocate for member interests, develop workforce skills, and provide strategic vision in the interest of growing the state's health industry, economy, and reputation. Please take a look at their site for more information. It's ihif.org. and you can learn about how they serve members across Indiana. Their leadership members include companies like Lilly, Cook, IU Health, and some other sponsors of theirs are Roche and Fort Wayne Metals. So please check out IHIF.org and check out their sponsors. And thank you so much to Kristen Jones, their fabulous CEO and president. And also thanks to IHIF. Now back to the show. So Valita, are you ready for the rapid fire round?
I hope so.
Okay.
There's that internal self-doubt I was talking about.
We'll have to work on that. We'll turn these into therapy sessions.
Yeah.
Finish this sentence. The one principle I will never compromise is...
Have fun.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah.
What is one thing every aspiring leader should stop doing today?
Stop comparing yourself to others, because it's only based upon your perception of what those others are like or who they are, which is likely to be incomplete.
Well, I love that. I love that. So what is one thing every aspiring leader should start doing today?
If you're not already, keep learning. Read books or news or blogs or listservs. Even if your time only allows you to skim headlines, leaders need to have some idea of the future, where others are headed, where you want to be headed, and what will be relevant in the future. So try to stay up to date.
Great. And that Facebook and Twitter don't count. Unless you got the
Do you
news.
know, I would say I do rely upon Twitter quite a bit.
Yeah, Twitter.
For headlines.
Yeah.
I try to be very careful about my sourcing and the news that I perpetuate, but it can be a very interesting source of relevant information. So
I agree.
I keep my eyes on a lot of different sources.
Is there an online resource, speaking of online resources, is there one that you think might benefit aspiring leaders in our industry?
Do you know, I think our industry, healthcare, pharma, health information technology, is relevant to every industry. I'm going to say healthcare is relevant to everyone.
Yeah.
And information, digital information, and the care we take with digital information is relevant to everyone.
It's true.
And I think leaders in particular need to be aware of the threats to their digital information. At the board level, at the leadership level, every organization, small, medium, and large. So the one website that I recommend is Brian Krebs' website, and it's called KrebsOnSecurity.com. And the thing I like about him is even if you're not technologically savvy, you can understand his explanation of cyber threats.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And what book has had the biggest impact on your professional life?
I had a hard time thinking of one of these. You teed me up for this question. And the one that I wrote down was the one that came to mind first. And I read it many years ago. And it's Peter Kennedy Toole. And the book is A Confederacy of Dunces.
Nice.
And the reason that...
That was written just right after the last election, right?
No, this was... this was written... It was actually published, I believe, after the death of the author, Peter Kennedy Toole.
Oh.
And his mother published it. And he didn't write very many books. But the thing about this book I really like and translates to leadership is that it's funny, it's poignant, it's sad, and it demonstrates the subtle power of observation, which I really like.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
This is the part, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and this is the part where they would go to our website and click through so that we can get the commission. But we don't do that. We don't do that on this show.
But you could say, hey, if you like what you hear, like us and share this podcast with your friends.
That's right.
Perpetuate
I think
us.
I will say that.
Yeah.
Hey, if you like what you hear, like us and share with your friends.
Right.
Yeah, I just did that.
Good.
Well, man, this has been great.
Good.
Like, there's been so much great information and inspiration, and the whole ethical framework thing is going to stick with me for a while. Where did you, is that something you thought of, or is there somewhere I would be able to go to? Like, is there an ethics board somewhere that puts that? Who came up with that?
So this is a great question.
Yeah.
It was developed over time by much smarter people than I am, who were thinking about the practice of medicine. So grew up within the clinical community and has been refined over time. But those 4 basic principles have remained the key cornerstones to ethical dialogue and addressing matters of ethics in healthcare. Mm-hmm. But what I have tried to do, which may be new, is translate that framework into data privacy and an ethical framework for using the sensitive data that now every business is required to steward on behalf of individuals. And I feel like every business is not doing a very good job of managing our personal information yet. And so I am trying to get folks to start adopting this fairly old ethics model or framework into a new application, and that is sensitive information. And so I can certainly send you a couple of good links to talk about this this ethical framework and these 4 main principles.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We'll put that out so that the listeners can find it.
Great.
Again, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for teeing me up with some thought-provoking questions.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
All right. That's it. You have just experienced the Life Science Effect. If you liked it, be sure and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And more importantly, tell your colleagues, your boss, your friends. It'll make you look smart. Maybe it'll even get you a raise. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, BPM Associates. Set your medical innovations in motion. BPM helps life sciences companies design, manage, and execute their most complex projects. What effect will you cause? And thanks to today's guest. Let us know who else I should be talking to. Send me an email at steven.vinson@bpm-associates.com. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Now go make something wonderful happen.